Hello, my name is Ken Small and I'm with SSA Architecture in Las Vegas, Nevada. This is part of our Frequently Asked Questions video series, and it's entitled 6 Things to Do Before You Start Drawing Your New Building's Blueprints. Since we're fairly high up in the Google search rankings, we get quite a few calls from people who want to start construction on a new ground-up commercial building. And so in those cases, most people don't understand the process that leads into creating what everyone calls blueprints, and those architects normally refer to as construction documents. And so I just want to walk you through the steps that you need to look at doing typically in the Las Vegas area. This will be common for a lot of other areas of the country, although where there's a less regulated environment they may be unnecessary. So this isn't necessarily going to apply to your project, but it is typical. So for each one of these items there's a lot more detail, and I'll reference you to the videos that I did on those topics with more detail if doing those items is of interest to you. So the first thing is, if you find a piece of property that you want to buy, I highly recommend that before buying it you allow an architect, if not us then anyone, to do a preliminary design drawing, a sketch on your project, because there are so many people who purchased a piece of land that's not suitable for their intended use that it's a very good idea to do this process to make sure that at least you're in the right ballpark. You're not way too small or way too large, or don't have some of the things that are needed to make it possible to do your actual project in the location that you're looking at. And so a lot of people will go around in Nevada asking contractors how much for a building. Oh, how much to build a building for my architect's office? How much to build a building for my private school? How much to build a building for whatever, a dentist office, an office building, anything. And this is akin to going into a restaurant and asking how much is a meal. Well, it depends on what meal you want, and the preliminary design process is how you make up your mind about what you want your building to be, the size of it, a little bit about the exterior of it, maybe little or nothing in some cases, but how big is the parking lot, how big is the building, how is everything placed, and so on. And this is I call a due diligence preliminary design process, and if you already own the land you should still do it anyway, but highly recommended before closing on the land, and probably before putting any earnest money down on the land, unless you're in a really hot real estate market. So we have a video on the preliminary design process, but suffice it to say you're going to have a deliverable that is a sketch. It could be a freehand sketch or drawn on CAD that shows, again in my analogy of the restaurant, what meal you want. And then we recommend doing what's called a due diligence planning review. Now the planning departments in local government want you to do an official submission to their process, but we can take that preliminary document down to the planning department and talk to them about the specifics of the project, because while some government agencies will just tell you yes to anything to lock you in so that you're married to the site and then they kind of have you by the throat, this isn't normally the case. in the Las Vegas area. We do have many jurisdictions: Clark County, City of Henderson, City of Las Vegas, City of North Las Vegas, and so on. But there is a tendency in human nature to be optimistic. So if you say to somebody, hey, I'm thinking of building a daycare here, then normally the planning department is going to say, oh yeah, you got the right zoning, you can do that. But when you actually show them a drawing of a daycare building of a certain size and what you propose for parking and other things like that, then you'll get a much more specific feedback, like, oh, you can't build in the east property line for 20 feet because of what you're next door to, or you can't build on the west within 20 feet of the west property line because there's a setback there, or they're planning a roadway expansion in the front, or things of this nature. So that process I normally refer to as the due diligence preliminary design process, and then after that there should be a decision on your part. So you make a decision that yes, we're going to proceed on or not. You know, if it's not the right lot for you and you haven't purchased it, then you're out the money for the preliminary process. But I've seen a lot of people buy land for millions of dollars and then find out that the land won't work for their intended purpose, and then they have to pay 6 or 8% to sell the land, and there's no backing out on the original deal. So they own it, they got it, they're stuck with it, and then go out and buy a new piece of land. So when you think about relative costs, it's got a great potential for savings, and we have seen a lot of property in the Las Vegas area that's centrally located that hasn't been built on, and there's no clear reason looking at it why it hasn't been built on. But when you go through this process, you realize what the reason is. It becomes readily apparent. And after exiting that process, you are going to have made a decision to make and file for the official entitlement process. So this process can be called entitlements or design review, depending on the situation. If you're in the, if you don't have to make any zoning changes, if you're not doing the kind of use that requires unusual hearings like a bar or gambling or something like that, then it's normally a design review process. And but essentially the same in terms of timeline. You're going to add more detail and hardline drawings to the preliminary design that you had already, and then you'll make a very specific list of items up and submit for a process that can be quite lengthy. And again, we have a 15-20 minute video that explains the process, but the thumbnail of it is that you're going to meet with bureaucracy, you're going to go to a town board, you're going to meet with bureaucracy again, you're going to go to a planning commission, you're going to meet with bureaucracy again, and you're going to go to either the county commission or the city council or something like that. And those processes are said to take 90 days, but it's quite common to have it take 120 days, and it's not unheard of to be completely turned down in those processes. So it is not a sure thing. Granted, based on the information you discover during the preliminary design process, you should know how risky an endeavor this is. But for instance, if you want to do something like a drug rehab center or exotic dance bar, marijuana sales, your odds are not very good. But if you want to build an office building or hair salon or church, more than likely you'll get approved, but not necessarily with everything that you ask for. So that entitlement process, the more compressed it is, the harder it is to negotiate on your behalf. And if the bureaucracy or somebody at one of these public hearings wants something, the inclination is to give in on it so that you can get through in the timeline that you originally planned. Anyone can object to your process, what you're trying to do in these steps, and during the entitlement or design review process. And it's a time-consuming process on your end, and it's a time-consuming process in terms of the calendar, and there's no way to speed up the calendar because these government agencies and quasi-governmental hearing processes run on a regular schedule, and there's no way to have them have an extra meeting or something to facilitate you. So assuming that you were approved in the entitlement process, and they said, yes, you can do a building that's close enough to what was your original which meal would I like wish, then we're going to go on to the just one little kind of meat and potatoes simple thing that we recommend that you do. Again, you don't absolutely have to do that, but that is to obtain a soils report on the site. And sometimes you will want to get a soils report before you close on the property. Sometimes you'll want to close on the property while you're in the entitlement process because you only have a certain number of days. But finding out what the soil conditions are on the site is important to you because you could be building on a dump, you could be building on very inconvenient soils for cost control. There's some soil conditions which are very expensive to build on. Believe it or not, even though we're out in the middle of the desert, you can find groundwater. So somewhere during this, the preliminary design, due diligence planning review and entitlement process, you would probably want to get a soils report. You're going to need it later on anyway when the structural engineering comes. And then finally, another optional item, if you're like most people, you don't have an unlimited budget, and at any point in this process you can hand a general contractor a copy of the drawings that you have and ask them to give you a price range estimate. It's not a bid. We have a video talking about bidding versus estimating, but if you have $500,000 to build your building with, and you think that as a result of having that money that you're going to be able to get it done, you can hand it to a general contractor and say, well, $500,000 get it done, and they can say yes, or you can ask them how much you think it will take to get this done. And this is really just an honest opinion type thing to see if you're within the range of your budget. So then if you check marked all those boxes, and again we have a video on cost estimating and soils reports, then you've reached the point where you have at least spent 4 months, and then you are ready to begin creating the blueprints or construction documents. This is not necessarily a linear path, so you can decide to start on the construction documents while you're in any of these processes. If you're in a big hurry, we do run into people who are in businesses where they want to be open in time for some particular high season in their business. So if it's a grocery store, you want to be open in time for early November. And if you're at the in tourist-related business, you want to be open again in time for early November, or maybe in the beginning of the summer, something like that. So you can decide to proceed on with the construction documents at any time, but because these other processes lead to discoveries that make you want to have to change the construction documents, it's not the least expensive first cost. So that process, the steps that I just gave you, the 6 items, at least 4 months, maybe 6 months, honestly maybe never in some cases depending on what your use is, but 4 to 6 months for that process. And this has nothing to do with our firm. This is just how long it takes regardless. If you go with an architectural firm that's busy, which most are here in Vegas at this time, then they might not be able to hop right on it when each step in the process is ready to proceed. So that's also a consideration it can add to the timeline. And then how long does it take to do the construction documents is the next question, and it depends on the size of the building and a lot of details. But the big step in the construction documents is normally civil engineering, and the civil engineering approval process typically takes 4 to 6 months again. So now you're up to 8 months to a year before you're ready to break ground, and that's assuming that the architect is drawing the architectural and other construction documents while the civil engineer is going through his processes. So if you've heard of critical path scheduling, which I don't have a video on, that means that these things are not laid to end. They are, instead of end to end, they're overlapping according to some if-then statements, and so you can compress down a little bit. But if you think in the range of a year to get your project started, that's plus or minus 2 months is probably a fair estimate for me, not knowing what your project is or how big it is or any of the details. You're not going to be able to go out and hire an architect and have him draw construction documents immediately, because that's not how the system works. And if you do, if he agrees to do it, that's fine. If you hire me to do it, I will. But we're going to end up changing the construction documents while you're in the planning process. And so it costs more money, but if you're in a hurry, if money is not an object, then this is possible. But look at a planning video like this would try to tell you to plan enough time to do everything so that you're not acting in a panic. And a year is not a leisurely pace. It's hop right on it. Whenever you get comments back from staff in one of these government agencies, you need to have somebody begin work on whatever it is that they commented on or needs to be addressed immediately. Always remember that you're essentially reinventing the wheel every time you build a new building. And so you're going to go through some of the decision-making processes that everybody else does, and there's no perfect building or ideal way to do it. So this is what takes some time. Finally, the last question you're probably going to ask is, from there, how long to construct? Normally, while the plans are in plan check, the bidding process can be begun. We're seeing, for a ground-up building, a month to 6 weeks in plan review at the various building departments. This is not the planning department now, this is the building department. It's another department. Everything I said before was in the planning department. So there are some ways to expedite that process, and our firm does offer those opportunities, ways of handling it to expedite it. But 4 to 6 weeks is a fair estimate, again, not knowing what your project is. And then the rest of the story is that during the last 2 weeks in the building department, you can begin the bidding process because you've had your preliminary comments back from the building department, the general contractors, and the whole process require somewhat of a definitive set of construction documents to actually get a good bid process going. And then either right at when the plans are cleared from plan check or within a couple weeks, you can complete your bidding process, award, and then the general contractor can start shortly thereafter. And so again, there are more rapid ways to do that. It could be a negotiated job with a single general contractor, but most of our work, we bid 3 general contractors, and then the general contractors will need some time to deal with their subcontractors and their estimating procedures and all that. And when they get all that back to us, then we have to do an analysis to see just because one bid is below the other might not be the bid that you want to take. And there will be another video on that eventually. But the point is that at that point is when you can start construction. So that's where we come up with a year added on to the planning procedures and drawing the construction documents and so on, and using critical path planning and beginning the construction documents before you're completely out of the entitlement process brings you to a year. If you don't, if you lay them all end to end, it's longer. How long will it take to build a ground-up building? Not knowing what the building is, certainly the absolute minimum is 4 months. And then 6 months is typical, and it's not uncommon at all to see a ground-up building take a year to get built, depending on the size. So all these things are project-specific, and there's a lot of detail in them, but I hope this video helps connect you with our other videos that speak more specifically on these topics and enable you to get an idea of A, if you even want to enter into this process, maybe you'd rather buy an existing standing building, or B, whether you would want to get started a little earlier, or perhaps give me a call and come and meet at our office. Initial consultation at our office is always free for commercial projects, and I hope you will call the office and schedule to meet with me or one of my staff and talk about what it is you're contemplating. If you have any questions, I'd suggest that you go to our website, look at the frequently asked questions first, and if that doesn't yield an answer, then to email at the email address at our website. I don't normally check the videos for questions and comments. A lot of people watch and not too many people comment, so hopefully you've enjoyed the video, and I'll ask you to please like and subscribe, and to go to our website and look at some of the projects that we've done, and give us a call if you decide to go ahead. My name is Ken Small, and I'm with SSA Architecture in Las Vegas, Nevada, 702-873-1718. Thanks a lot, and thanks for watching.